Hello and welcome to Where Are They Now? I am your host, Heather Lindstedt from the Chelmsford High class of 1985. Today I welcome Chaz Scoggins from the class of 1966. I am so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining me on this show.
I'm glad I was able to do it.
Yeah. I have to be honest, I read your articles all the time. I'm a huge Red Sox I'd call myself a fanatic, but anyways, to talk about you didn't start in Chelmsford, right? You moved into Chelmsford. How was your transition to a town like Chelmsford?
Well, my dad was a career Air Force officer, so we moved around a lot from Maryland, Washington, D.C., to Japan, to Colorado, and moved up here just at the end of my 8th grade year.
Yeah.
So it took some adjusting to do, and probably the biggest adjustment, I think, for me was having to be in homeroom like at 7:10 in the morning, because living in Colorado, there's a lot of farming out there, and school didn't start till 8:30, and got out at 3:30. So to come here and have to be out there at 6:30 to catch the bus in the morning, that was the hardest adjustment for me, I think.
But did you transition well in the town of Chelmsford, though, doing sports and getting into the high school? I know you participated in sports. Was that a good transition for you? Is that what helped you kind of get into the groove of the high school?
I think that was the best transition, to be in sports, because there's a jockocracy,
yeah.
And I got to be part of that. For I wasn't a particularly gifted athlete. I could run fast. I was pretty good in track, but being part of that if I look back on it, my high school years in Chelmsford were probably the most fun years of my life. And even though I lived in a lot of places, people ask, where did you grow up? And I always say Chelmsford, because it feels like home to me.
Now, did you have siblings in front of you or behind you, or no?
I was the eldest of 6.
Okay, so you had to lead the way?
Yeah, sort of.
Well, I'm sure your reputation preceded you, but talk about some of the people that you met as far as teachers and those kind of coaches that kind of influenced you and allowed you to have the success that you wanted to have academically and kind of get yourself going.
Well, success academically might be a bit of a reach. Sometimes I wonder how I got into the Chelmsford High Hall of Fame, because I wasn't a particularly gifted student. I wasn't a particularly gifted athlete. But probably Ed Quinn, who taught U.S. history at the time, and he was my track coach. So he was a great coach to have, and really piqued my interest in history. Funny thing about it is I had Leo King, who later became a dean at UMass Lowell, as a geometry teacher, and I can't say I learned a lot of geometry, but for some reason he was always correcting my grammar. So he probably taught me more about English than he did about geometry. So those are probably the 2 most influential teachers and coaches that I had here.
And then, so from Chelmsford High, though, that you decided to go to, it was UMass. It's UMass Lowell now, but it was UMass
Lowell State.
Lowell State, right.
Right.
But you weren't going for journalism or writing or anything like that. You went for history because of Coach Quinn?
Yeah, and it was the easiest course I could pass.
Okay.
But no, I kind of intended to. Writing never occurred to me back then, which is strange, because I come from a 3rd generation writer in my family. But and when I was in high school, I wrote a lot of these novellas, little books that were like 100, 140 pages long about kids I was growing up with, the farms and this sort of thing, fantasies, and they got passed around to everywhere. And a couple of weeks later, they show up to me after everybody got passed around and got to see their names or nom de plumes in the stories. And mercifully, all those stories have been lost because they're pretty terrible. But at that time, anyway, I knew I could write. But my intention was to become a teacher, and I graduated in 1970 with a BA in history. But the problem then was that the Vietnam War was going on. It was the first year of the draft lottery. So it was no longer a matter of hit and miss, will I be drafted or won't I? Once you had a number and they said you were going to go to 195 that year, you knew you were gone. So that made it difficult for me to find a teaching job, because no one was going to hire you knowing in a few months you were going to be called into the Army. So what happened was that I needed a job. It was the summer, and I'd been working part-time at the Lowell Sun since my senior year in college, and a full-time job opened up in the sports department, and I applied for it. And they said, you know, we'd like to have you, but we want somebody who's going to be here for a while. We don't want somebody who's going to be gone in 6 months. And I lied and said, oh, yeah, I'll be here. Because 6 days later, my draft notice showed up in the mail. And so I ended up going to into the Army for 2 years. And when I came out, it was in October of '72. And too late to get a teaching job for that academic year. So I said, well, I'll go back to the Lowell Sun, work there until the next academic year, and then I go into teaching. But at that point, the fellow who had been covering the Red Sox happened to die. And so they gave me the beat that spring, and once I went to the first Red Sox game, that was just in my blood, and there went the idea of teaching, because I just did that for the next 44 years of my life. And looking back, I don't think I would have been a very good teacher anyway. I didn't really have a lot of patience, I think, and I think I ended up in the right profession.
But even prior to though you being drafted, though, you had some stories though in the Lowell Sun, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I was mostly started out as a stringer.
But didn't you go to the riot too, or?
Oh, that wasn't officially as a member of the staff, but would be my junior year in college, and I was working on the student newspaper at Lowell State, The Advocate, and a couple other friends of mine who were also on the staff. We decided, well, let's go out to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, having no idea what was going to happen, and we drove out there. There was a transit strike going on. Only the subways were running, no cabs, no buses, nothing. And then, sure enough, we walked into all these riots, totally unexpected. And after going down, we said, well, we're journalists, we'll cover this anyway. There's no way we could get to the amphitheater where the convention was going on, because it was on the south side of Chicago, and we had no way to get there. So we got caught up in that story, and while we're writing about it, while it's going on, I said, you know, I should write a story about this and mail it to the Lowell Sun. And fully expecting that going with the U.S. mail, it wouldn't get there before the convention was over, but somehow it got there quickly, and it appeared in the paper. And I think the headline was "Lowell Students Flee Chicago Cops." And that was my first story. They gave me a byline on it. That was the first story I ever wrote. But the funny thing about it is, one of my friends on the trip, he hadn't told his parents that he was in Chicago, and they read it, and all they hear is that he might be arrested and all this sort of thing. So it kind of turned out to be a bit of a fiasco in that sense. But that's how I got my start in journalism.
And then you had something else while you were in the Army, right? Were there other stories, or you didn't write it all while you were?
No, I didn't write it all while I was in the Army. It was too tied up with things to do. Yeah.
So you get out, and all of a sudden they say, "Here are the Red Sox." Now, were you already a baseball fan, but you had moved around? So had you already jumped onto the Red Sox bandwagon though while you were in Mass, or were you always a baseball fan?
Well, I was born in Baltimore, so initially I was a Baltimore Orioles fan. I was a fan. But when we first moved up here in '62, my dad would take me and my brother to Red Sox games when they played the Orioles. And the Red Sox were mediocre or worse in the early '60s. And they always beat the Orioles, which got very frustrating for me. And I'd go home, my dad would say, you know, if you're going to be that way, I'm not going to take you to any more games. So why can't they ever win? And then in '65, I finally said, and this was the year the Red Sox lost 100 games. I said, enough of this. I'm going to transfer my allegiance to the Red Sox. So that was, I didn't wait till '67 like most people did.
Okay.
But I became a fan in '65 and have been a fan ever since, although I couldn't really admit it while I was working. But.
Right. So when you started though, and they said, okay, it's the Red Sox, and did you ever have any thought of not being a sports writer though? Like that was completely, this is my passion, I'm ready for this.
Pretty much. And I knew I had talent for writing, but I never thought about doing it. But I will say, and the Lowell Sun was very good to me in this sense. Starting out, I hadn't really developed a style of writing yet. So I kind of adapted my style from writers that I happened to like, which kind of made my writing an amalgam of all these different writing styles. But the paper was patient with me. And after several years, I finally developed my own style and felt really comfortable writing.
So who were the other writers, though, that you really would say that you stole from?
Oh, I can't really remember. They didn't necessarily be sports writers.
Okay.
They could be authors or
Yep.
just writing styles that intrigued me, and so I kind of copy it.
Yeah. So favorite Red Sox player, cover?
That's kind of hard to narrow it down for all the years that I did it. I covered the team for 40 years.
Yep, per decade then.
What's that?
Per decade then?
Oh, well, the players I enjoyed most were probably Fred Lynn and Kevin Youkilis, who I covered as the Spinners.
Yep.
And let me see. They're probably or Rich Gedman, who I became close friends with.
Yeah.
So, and Dennis Eckersley, I can't forget Dennis Eckersley. He and I became very, very close.
Yeah. And you didn't do just the Red Sox, right? You've had other things about doing the Spinners. You mentioned that. You covered UMass hockey and those kind of things. So was there ever a time, though, that you wanted to expand and do other sports, or no?
No, I actually enjoy the focus of it. And I didn't really care to do high school sports or other sports. And so generally it worked out, being a kind of a senior member of the staff, that if I wasn't covering the Red Sox or UMass Lowell, or the Spinners, which were my focuses, I worked in the office on the desk, and I enjoyed desk work, putting together the stats page, putting together that puzzle every night. So that kind of, once in a while I had to go out and cover a high school football game or something, but I was really only interested in doing those three teams, the Spinners and UMass Lowell hockey and the Red Sox.
So when you got to vote for the Hall of Fame, like what was that like becoming a voter, and what kind of research goes into making sure that you, I don't know, covered everything and knew all these stats when you can kind of vote for the Hall of Fame?
Well, to qualify, you had to be a member of the Baseball Writers Association, which I was, but you had to be a member for 10 years before then they would give you the right to vote. And back then, the privilege was good for the rest of your life. A few years ago, they changed it, and they decided people who had been out of the game for more than 10 years no longer had the right to vote. But it was a thrill. It was one of the things I looked forward to, was getting that vote. The other thing was, after 10 years, you qualify for a Baseball Writers Gold Card, which means you can go to games free for the rest of your life. Minor league, major league games, you can get in. So those were two of my goals. But after 10 years, I was just enjoying it and just kept going.
So can you tell me about Hall of Fame voting? Like, were there anyone that you were just like, I can't believe I voted for that person, or like, I can't wait to vote for that person?
I can't say I regret anybody that I voted for. Sometimes I wondered if there were a couple of times back in late 90s and early 2000s, there had been a tremendous generation of ball players. You were limited to a maximum of 10 people you could vote for. And some years there were 12 or 13 people I felt deserved, and I could only pick 10, so I had to put a couple of them aside and say, maybe next year, and hope that they stayed on the ballot, because if you didn't get 5% of the vote, you're off the ballot. So I had to kind of weigh, will this guy be on the ballot next year? So I always wondered, there's several people who got into the Hall of Fame that I didn't vote for because I thought they weren't qualified, didn't meet my standards for what it should be. And sometimes I even did for guys coming on the ballot who probably really didn't deserve to get in, and I'll use the example of David Eckstein, who played second base for the Spinners back in the 90s. had a really good major league career, but he wasn't a star. He made 2 All-Star games. He was the MVP of the 2006 World Series. He had a good career, and being in baseball, you hear managers talk about everybody wanted to have this guy on the team because he was totally unselfish. And you put down a bunt, do whatever it took, hit and run. He throws bat at the ball to get the hit, and every manager loved him. So I knew he wasn't going to get in, but when he came up onto the ballot, and I said, I'm going to cast a vote for him because I think he at least deserves some sort of recognition for being on there. I was one of 2 people who voted for him, and I remember getting criticism. Why'd you vote for that guy? He's not a Hall of Famer. But I felt it was important to me to know that, to show that I appreciated the kind of career he had, even though it wasn't a Hall of Fame career.
Yeah. So did you think that the Red Sox were ever going to win?
I began to have my doubts after 1986. It was, I covered that World Series, was official scorer for one of the 3 official scores for that World Series. And after watching them blow, I thought, I don't know. But I kept saying, when they win it, it's going to be like one of the highlights of my life. And the funny thing was the year that they did win it in 2004. And once they got past the Yankees, I knew they were going to win it. I knew they were better than the Cardinals. But come to Game 4 in St. Louis, there's an hour time zone difference between the 2 places. So I have a deadline that I'm already an hour behind. It had rained. Game 4 was delayed. So they started late. And then the Red Sox finally win it. And I look at the clock, and I've got 35 minutes to write 2 stories, a game story and a sidebar. And I think maybe I'll savor this for like 30 seconds. And then I've got to go to work and get this done. So I never really got a chance to, by the time I finished my writing and everything else, kind of the moment had passed. So I never got as excited about it as I thought I would.
Did you think that losing Nomar was going to be the end of the chance, or no?
No, not at all. I was never much of a Nomar fan.
Yeah.
When I was official scoring, and I official scored for 44 years for Major League Baseball, he was a very tough player to score for because he hot-dogged everything. So he turned routine plays into difficult plays unnecessarily. And when he did that and screwed it up, I'd penalize him with an error. And which he was never happy about that. So, he was a talented player, but I just never thought, he was a goofy guy to talk to anyway. He was very difficult to deal with.
And how about a manager? Who would you say that was your favorite manager?
Now, believe it or not, that would be Don Zimmer.
Yeah.
And he had his flaws, but he was very, very quotable. He had this old-time way of speaking. And even though it was frustrating, they always seemed to fall short in the years that he covered, that he managed the team in the late 70s, with all the talent they had. He was just a great storyteller. He was a raconteur. You don't really find many of those, and especially in those years. I traveled with the Red Sox from 1977 until '82, which is probably the most fun years of my life. I wouldn't do it again. But it was fun, and so I got to really know personally all these. Got the players, the Eckersleys, the Fred Linds, and flew with the team, stayed in the same hotels, and then Zimmer was just such a raconteur. It's funny how he was great before a game. We come out, and those days we could, the writers in some cities, we were allowed to go out and shag balls in extra batting practice, which is a blast to go out there and shag these fly balls. It was the players wanted to hit. They didn't want to go out and catch the ball, so we would do that. And then after that, we'd sit around on the grass and we'd talk and get to know these people. And it was just got so many terrific stories from that era. But Zimmer was great at that time of the day when there was no pressure. Closer the game time got, the whiter his knuckles got. And by the time the game was over, win or lose, he was gripping the ends of the chairs of, the armchair to do it. So he was terrible after a game, but he was great before a game, and that's why he's one of my favorite, probably my favorite Red Sox manager.
When was it that you knew? I mean, you had an unbelievable career, 40 years, but when was it that there was a story that you really felt like, I've made it, and like this will never, I'll be doing this for the rest of my life?
I don't really, the great thing about that job, and one of the reasons I don't feel I would have been a very, very good teacher, was no 2 days are ever the same. It's not a Monday to Friday, 8 to 5 job. It's weird hours, long hours, and people would always say, you have a great job. I wish I had your job. And I said, well, yeah, it'd be a great job if you don't mind not being home on holidays, not being home at night, because most games are at night, not being around on weekends, and realize you're not just going to the game, you got preparation to do before, you got work to do afterwards. So if that's your idea of a great life, well, good luck to you if you ever get a chance to do it. But.
Well, and you just admitted to it, right? In 2004, you didn't really get to celebrate, like,
right.
or take it really in, right? You're working.
I had really no social life
Yeah.
in those years unless I was on vacation, because when sporting events happen, especially baseball's an everyday sport,
Yeah.
for 6 months, you just didn't really get that time. And I was very fortunate that my two wives were very understanding about that, and never resented it or anything like that. But it was a great time.
So how about like going to Cooperstown? Like, what was that like for you in those kind of times? Like, just
I only went out there twice. The first time was when Carl Yastrzemski and Johnny Bench were inducted, and drove out there for that ceremony. And that would have been in '89, I think it was. And the next time was in the year 2000, and I was national president of the Baseball Writers of Association at that time. So I was the nominal host of the whole weekend. So it was fun to get up there on stage and be surrounded by Carlton Fisk went in that year, who'd been one of my very favorite players growing up. Matter of fact, it was Carlton Fisk who gave me the nickname Chaz. And I guess I should digress a little bit on that.
There you go.
When I first started at the paper, I used my full name, Charles R. Scoggins. It started with Charles Scoggins. And then people came up to me and said, I didn't know your dad wrote for the Lowell Sun. I said, my dad's in the Air Force. This is me, I'm Charles Jr. So I put a junior at the end of it. And then in the mid-'70s, the Lowell Sun shrunk the width of his paper, and they said, Charles Scoggins Jr. isn't going to fit anymore on one line. We're wasting a line of space. And they said, you've got to find a way to shorten your name. And I knew Carlton Fisk always called me Chaz, so that became my byline.
Really? Were your parents, everybody was fine with you just canning your name?
Oh, yeah. They were fine with it.
Well, I mean, you're named after your dad, but yeah.
Right.
Wow. Chaz came from Carlton Fisk.
Right, yeah.
And he was one of your favorites?
Right.
And he's still in the area, isn't he? Or
no, actually, he lives,
his family.
I think he's divides time between Illinois, because he finished with the White Sox, and he's in Florida. So he doesn't really come up here anymore. But, he lived up in Raymond, New Hampshire when he was playing for the Red Sox. So.
Were you ever intimidated by any of the players?
No.
No.
No. I mean, I say that, but I mean, one of the reasons I didn't particularly enjoy covering basketball, and I did my last Celtics game in 1973 and said, I'll never want to do another, but I did some UMass Lowell basketball, and it was hard to go up, being a normal-sized guy, to go up and talk to a player's knee, because you couldn't see up, especially with Newt Bowl, who was 7'6", playing for University of Bridgeport at the time. It was weird. I just didn't feel I could relate to people that big. It's sort of the same with football players, where hockey players and baseball players, they're more my size. Close in size, I can feel that I have something in common with them.
Was there ever a player that questioned one of your stories?
Oh, more than I can count. So,
So you build the relationship, but there's always going to be that chance that
well, especially if you got too close to them, you get certain close, but they kind of feel that you're close to them, and then when you have to make a bad call or write something that they did bad, then they get upset that I thought we were friends.
Yeah.
So especially as an official scorer, and that happened a lot. As official scorer, they always want me to change calls, and got into some nasty situations there doing that, but.
So you haven't told me that you have a favorite story, those kind of things, but you're still a writer.
Yes.
So it just never goes away. And you don't have the stories, though, that you were passing around the high school, but do you have stories now that you're writing? Do you pass those out to people to read, or are you just doing it for your own passion to put it on paper?
Well, I've had three books published on baseball, one about the history of the Spinners, and couple of Red Sox books that I believe are in the library up here in the local authors section. But at some point, I still had an urge to do something other than sports. I enjoyed what I did, but it was never my life. And when it ended a few years ago, I could look back with no regrets. But I really wanted to write a novel.
Yeah.
And I tried, but I wasn't mature enough. But finally, in the early 2000s, I finally decided to start writing historical fiction novels, and I read a lot of history books, nonfiction, after school, not just in school. And I would read maybe a paragraph or even one sentence in a history book, and I would say, I want to find out more about this because I think this is very interesting. And I would focus on that sort of things. I turned them into a lot of historical fiction novels. They've never been published, but they are on a website. So
if people still want to read you, where could they go?
It'd be Scoggins Books and Blogs.com would be the website, and I have some books on there, and I'm still doing that, and still have the urge to write.
Yeah. Well, right. It seems like it's never left you.
Right.
Just you've taken a little bit different path and picked up on something with your history that you love.
Right. I always had the interest in history, and that gave me a chance to write. But the hard part, and those when I was working at the paper, all that sort of thing, you didn't really have the time to sit down and do it. But later on in my career, when I was doing half desk work and half covering live events, I started finding the time to start doing that and actually get a couple of things done.
Well, as one of your fans, I'm going to start reading. So I'm going to go to your website and check it out. And I hope all of our Chelmsford alum can find you as well and read what you've been writing. So I am so thankful that you were here with me today. I'm sure that every Chelmsford alum is great that you're here and still writing. So to everybody, thank you for joining Chaz and I here at Where Are They Now? Have a great day.